person, and really what we've got going in Western medicine, as I see it, is either we've got a health model or we've got a disease model. And when we start to look at who built those two models, you've got to start with a guy called Hippocrates. I mean, every single health practitioner has either verbally or at least made a silent oath that they will take the Hippocratic Oath. And the Hippocratic Oath says, do no harm. And Hippocrates, it was 400 BC, so that's 2,500 years ago, said a lot of great things. He said a lot of great things, but I'll just share two of them with you. And one of them was that disease was not a function of the gods. It wasn't that the gods were angry. It was that there was an imbalance in our bodies. And perhaps today's God is genetics, and we'll come to that in a moment. But gods were not responsible for the illness that occurred. It was an imbalance in the body. And what he also said was, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. That's pretty relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago. Now let's fast forward 2,000 years to the 1600s. I told you it was only going to take 5 minutes, and these are my highlights, by the way. And if you were looking for somebody who Western medicine has been built on, you would have to look at this guy who was René Descartes. And Descartes was a mathematician, French mathematician and a philosopher. And he said lots of things. I mean, he had a huge influence on so many aspects. But I'm going to share 3 things with you that he said that is really the foundation of Western medicine. And one of them is that you need to break things down into their smallest parts in order to understand that. And at that time, that is exactly what you had to do in order to understand it. He also said that things had to be statistically significant in order to be relevant. And he also said, let the mind and body are separate, so they need to be considered separate. Now, if those 3 things haven't had a profound influence on the way Western medicine is practiced today, I mean, my own mother, my 89-year-old mother, now the wonders of modern medicine, she just had an aortic valve replacement. Incredible. They passed an aortic valve up through the artery in the leg and replaced the valve. And a fantastic piece of surgery. She had a slight complication, and so she had a raised temperature, an elevated temperature. And the cardiologist tried to establish what that raised temperature was, couldn't do it, so had to call in a respiratory physician because he needed an opinion on the lungs. She couldn't work it out either, so then they called in a gastroenterologist because it could have been in the gut, and neither of those 2 other practitioners were really qualified enough to deal with it. And finally, they called in a urologist to check whether that was the factor. But I worked out that between the 4 of them, there was well over 100 years of medical training and experience, and yet neither of them could work out why her temperature was elevated. So this is an example of the wonders of modern medicine. Fantastic. You know, replace an aortic valve in an 89-year-old woman. Could they work out some basic stuff? No, just couldn't work it out. Anyway, let's fast forward to a guy called Isaac Newton. And the reason I include Newton is because if I wanted to go back and study anything, I would not be doing a PhD in the cure of cancer. I would be doing a PhD in anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry. Because if we understood those basic sciences, we'd eliminate 90% of diseases anyway. And if you want to study physiology, physiology is a combination of 2 words, physics and biology. And Newton, of course, helped us explain the way the world worked. And he had a very linear way of thinking too. I mean, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. When you push something, it moves. And we'll come back to him. Now I move on to a guy called Pasteur. And please remember to close off all your phones. Vicky forgot to mention that. Now Pasteur came up with the germ theory. And he basically said germs cause disease, which sounded like a really neat model. And I think it's a model that still works throughout Western medicine as well. In the sense that, but at the same time, should I say, there was another guy called Beauchamp who argued with him and said, it's not the germ that causes the disease, it's the body in which the germ is placed. When that's out of balance, building on Hippocrates' idea, then the germ takes hold. And this argument went backwards and forwards. Of course, Pasteur won the argument in the end, but apparently on his deathbed, he did agree with Beauchamp. Anyway, let's fast forward then to a guy you may not have heard of, but this is a guy called Walter Cannon, who's a physiologist in the States in the early part of the 1900s, and he came up with the term homeostasis. And homeostasis is the function, the process of balance in the body. So building on this imbalance, he came up with the term homeostasis. Fast forwarding now, because if we're talking about physics, we have to talk about quantum physics. And as difficult as that may be to explain, and I'm not even going to try and explain it to you, other than I love this slide because he almost looks like he's writing my name on it. I was drawn to it immediately, but actually I prefer this one because quantum physics is a bit hard to get a handle on. You know, it basically said, instead of thinking very linearly, it was saying, well, every atom in the universe is made up of matter and energy. A kind of paradox, really. And that means every atom in this room, and that means every atom in our bodies, and every patient that we see, every one of us is affected by matter and energy. So this is a really important thing to remember when we're thinking about the human body. And then I go on to, and we're getting close now to the end of the 2,500 years, we're up to about 1920s where Howard Florey discovered antibiotics, and there couldn't be a more wonderful invention, discovery than antibiotics. How many millions of lives has that saved? And it fitted in beautifully with the germ theory, which said, well, you know, germ causes disease, let's have a pill to fix it. It fixed it, there's a model. So if you're depressed, why not take an antidepressant? If you're unable to sleep, take a sleeping pill. Inflammation, anti-inflammatory, and so it goes on. So this is the way Western medicine has built. And then I've included also Crick and Watson. Now, they began that whole, of course, discovered the DNA and work has been done on the human genome ever since. And I think what we're entering into now is a period of what I call genetic determinism. Genetic determinism is saying you're genetically predisposed to a condition and that's it. You know, we need to work out how to splice those genes or give you a medication or do something which will alter that gene. We've got the treatment for it. Another person, and if you haven't read this guy's book, Bruce Lipton, I would recommend it to you highly. I'm not sure whether he was the discoverer of epigenetics, but he's a PhD in cell biology, and he basically said, he was talking about thoughts. He said, thoughts become proteins called neurotransmitters, and they attach onto cell membranes, and it's the cell membrane that is the real brain of the body, and it causes genes to express themselves in the way they do. That's epigenetics. If you haven't heard the term epigenetics, you will be hearing a lot about it in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And it's an incredibly empowering concept because what it says is, in his case, he was talking about thoughts, but so can nutrients and so can environmental toxins attach to cell membranes and cause genes to express themselves in a certain way. So this is my model. This is a brief history of Western medicine as I see it, with on one side building on Hippocrates and looking at homeostasis and taking into account quantum physics, and on the other side, the Western model, which breaks things down to its smallest component and attempts to intervene to try to solve those problems. And both have value. Both have value. Now, and this has had a profound effect on the way people think generally, but in medicine particularly, in health particularly. Newtonian way of thinking, very linear. In quantum physics, very holistic. Now, I'm often asked, I'm a holistic dentist, and I'm often asked, what is a holistic dentist? And a holistic dentist is simply somebody whose primary focus is the person attached to the tooth rather than just the tooth. Now, you know, that is quite a different way of looking at things.